Hello, I'm Judd. I've been a pastor and counselor for over 40 years. I've preached about 4,000 sermons, and I've met with individuals, marriages, church leaders, all kinds of people for over 12,000 hours of face to face meetings. As a consultant and coach, I've worked with many different kinds of churches. I've seen them from what I call behind the curtain, from a perspective the public doesn't see. I've seen really healthy, thriving congregations, and I've seen profoundly unhealthy, struggling congregations. I've never seen a perfect one. I'm committed and excited about the church learning to use all the tools that are available to us in helping people experience the real freedom and lasting change that Christianity promises. Some of those tools have been discovered and developed in the mental health community based on psychology and other sciences. Let's stop pretending we have to have all the answers. Let's lead the way in building partnerships and learning communities that bring the mental health community and the church together. That's what we're going to be working toward on this podcast and YouTube. Welcome to the mental health and the mission of the church community.
All right, well, we're here with three friends. It's Mental Health and Mission of the Church, Pastor Chip Judd's podcast. Chip, you're up to good work, man, trying to bring two communities together. And you've got in this little digital space two younger pastors who it's a good thing that our environments, or at least we were in environments who kind of had a good placement of mental health and mission of the church. Chris and I both being pastors and having our fair share of challenges when it comes to our mental health. And Chip, you've been instrumental in both of our lives, man. So it's kind of neat little setup, the three of us being here together.
Yeah, man. I'm honored, man. But Chris, did you notice he had to get that age thing in there? I mean,
just slid it in.
He always does that. I'm not kidding. Every conversation we ever do, he always wants to make sure everybody knows he's old, I'm young.
You know, it's you know, what's interesting is how you take that, because I actually didn't realize that I do that all the time, but now that I'm realizing it, and I'm trying to show respect, and you're taking it the opposite every time.
No. I'm just playing, man. I don't care. I like it. Listen, I'm just glad you like me. I don't care. Yeah.
Chip, I am going to want to fit this question in at some point, and you can tell me if this would be a good time as Chris kind of unpacks his story and lets listeners know who he is. But I've always enjoyed hearing you give an assessment on how much of my issues you feel were more genetics and how much you felt were more environmental. And I'd rather focus more of our discussion on Chris, but I'm interested because I know Chris and him and I are friends. I'm curious what your take is on that too. But I don't know where you guys think we should start, just on Chris's background and what do you think?
Let's start right there for a minute. Sooner or later, that's going to come up in Chris's story. You know, there's lots of ways to say it. Physiological issues, meaning when there's some part of the body, and the brain is a part of the body, but a physiological issue, chemical imbalances and all that kind of thing, can't be fixed by talk therapy. You can't talk away a physiological issue. And honestly, it took me decades to figure that out as a Christian, spirit-filled, and kind of the charismania side of things. So, I mean, for me, Joey, I would say, knowing you and having walked with you for a decade and a half now, probably pretty close, and Chris too, really, I would say yours is like the percentage of, some would say nature, nurture, genetics and environment kind of thing. I would say yours is so little environment and genetics. I mean, environment and the nurture side. As I've watched it play, as we've tried what we did, I use my little bag of tricks, cognitive therapy and all that stuff. And you would make a certain amount of progress, but It wasn't until they got your medication really dialed in that, I mean, I have never seen you on as sustained a period doing as well as you are. I've never seen you in the whole decade and a half I've known you. And there's no way to take credit for it. I didn't like do some magic counseling session and you had a breakthrough. The bottom line is you got to an awful place and got a team of doctors that finally came up with forgive me for the term cocktail, but they finally came up with a mixture of drugs that just hit the sweet spot. And I mean, dude, you're just not even the same guy. And it's awesome. It's awesome to watch. And Chris, you would say the same thing about medication, right?
Oh yeah, big time. So I started talk therapy when I was in Columbia, overseeing the Seacoast Columbia campus, and
Right.
I would I can't remember how many times I went to like a general practitioner, and not to throw them under the bus or anything, but I would get like a kind of a random medication thrown at me, and I would try it, and I was really starting to believe that medication couldn't help me at all, which I
Right.
was really initially really kind of heartbroken by, because the therapy was helpful, but the level of anxiety was still an 8 to a 10. And until I started
Yeah.
seeing a psychiatrist that I still see to this day quarterly, and he actually started saying, all right, like talking about it almost like a soundboard. All right, like, we're going to crank these up and see what happens. And if that doesn't work, we're going to try something else. That until I started getting that type of focused, specific attention, it just wasn't moving the needle.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is
Just
how common is that, Chip, for people just not even to respond to medication? Because when I was coming out of my mental health crisis, I heard people say stuff like, "Man, that's really cool that you respond to medication in general." And I'm thinking,
yeah.
"Oh, wow, some people don't respond to medication?" Like, Chris, when you said that, I'm thinking to myself, that would be just heart-shattering. Like, oh, this thing that everybody
Yeah.
says can be so helpful and just realign stuff, I guess it doesn't work for me. That'd be the worst. My
Yeah.
gosh.
Well, I just to chime in there, I remember. So I was diagnosed with OCD when I was 27, and I had been experiencing the symptoms for some time up until then. But I remember the doctor, the psychiatrist that told me that medication could help me, and I like I shed a tear when he said that. I remember I got emotional because I didn't believe that I was helpable. There's a lot I could say about what had discouraged me up to that point, but I won't. It was just like, wow, so there actually is some change that could happen. Like that was like, cold water to a thirsty soul.
Yeah.
And then when I got thrown, I think it was a Lexapro prescription at first, and it was kind of like, and I didn't respond. And it was my own fault. I didn't stick with it at that point. I was just like, well, I guess the medication thing is off the table. And then I would go see a general practitioner here and there, and again, just get thrown something. I'd tell them what I had tried before, and they'd try Zoloft, and but and it still wasn't helping. So I was starting to actually think there was nothing in the medication community that could even touch what I was experiencing.
Yeah. Little bit tacky way to say it. So any mental health professional out there, forgive me. But to address, that issue there, what I would tell, like, let's say either of you were coming to me for counseling, and we got to the point after, it takes you a little while to figure some of this stuff out, but we got to a point where I was fairly confident it was a physiological, chemical brain issue. What I would say is, you're going to need to go to a psychiatrist. Don't go to your family doctor. They're great and they're wonderful, but this is not what they live in week in and week out. You're going to have to get to a psychiatrist. But this is the tacky part. Here's what I'd say to you. I'd say, okay, when you go, remember something. You're paying him or her. They're not paying you. They work for you. So here's the deal. Don't be afraid to say, this medication's not helping me. In other words, the only feedback they have on how it's working is what you tell them. So don't be afraid to tell them this is not working, or the side effects are horrible, or whatever. Take some, what do you call it, assertiveness in your treatment. And I don't, now they might be offended with the way I'm saying it, but I don't think they're offended with the thought behind it. They want to help you. They can't help you if you're not honest with them. And yet at the same time, again, not to be critical, they have, like all of us, we have our sort of pet remedies, and they're thinking cost and side effects and all that kind of thing. But you got to be honest and say, I've been honest 6 weeks and 8 weeks, 3 months. I don't know that I can tell a difference, or the difference is so small, it's not worth the side effects. And so that's kind of how I would put it. When I was thinking, Joey, and you push it other direction if you want, but Chris, I wanted to maybe start at the beginning, and I mean as young as you can go. Here's what because I want us to roll into, because we've jumped in here and people probably don't even know what your situation is. When was the first time in your life that you would have had this thought? What's going on with me? That doesn't seem like a reaction I should have, or a thought I should have. Like, was the first time it occurred to you that there might be something wrong?
It's a really good question. Yeah, because in retrospect, I can look at things that I wish I had thought something is wrong. But it was honestly, I want to say probably about when I got married. So I became a Christian when I was 18. And that's when I stopped. Like I don't know if people even, and I don't know if this is like just like a timing thing. Like I didn't even know the word anxiety in high school. And because people just didn't talk, at least not in my circles. I grew up in Connecticut and people just didn't talk about mental health. And I think I was using so many unhealthy coping mechanisms, pornography, drugs, just so many different things to not feel anything, that I wasn't even aware that I had, a mental health struggle. And then, I was so isolated once I became a Christian that I just thought even though it wasn't, now looking back on it, my Christian experience was not normal. OCD was definitely prevalent. And I can see that looking back on it. I just assumed everything was spiritual warfare. I just assumed that I must be having what was a normal Christian experience, because not having grown up Christian, all I had was basically me and my Bible and the handful of
Right.
Christians that were around me that I wasn't really opening up to. So I just thought, this is just a lot harder. Being a Christian honestly kind of sucks. It's a lot harder than not being a Christian. Like I was just forming all these assumptions without even realizing it, and not even knowing that I had a mental health issue. But it was once Abby and I we started dating in 2003, but I would say coming around once we finally were in the same house together in 2007, and I remember having my first panic attack that I can recall, where I actually like left our apartment in Mount Pleasant and drove out to Isle of Palms because I didn't know what to do with myself. That I started, and Abby started giving me feedback like, I don't know if I can live like this. Like I don't know if this isn't working. Like this is pulling you away from us. That I started realizing I've got a real problem that isn't being fixed.
Right.
So yeah.
You use two terms, OCD and panic attack. From your perspective, tell us what those are.
So yeah. So and I would say the OCD. So obsessive compulsive disorder. So I have I'm not through it all the way, so I'm not going to try to pretend like I'm talking as though it were already done. What'll happen is, best way I can describe it is by giving you an example. I'm driving down the street already with a certain level of anxiety, but that maybe one that I've just gotten used to and not really paying that much attention to. But then I look down to, check the radio or something like that, and I hit a bump on the road, or I look down and then I look up and I see that there was a guy on the road that I didn't notice. And then I'm driving, and rationally speaking, I know there's no way I could have hit that guy. I know I would have felt it, I would have seen it, I would have pulled over, but there's something in my head that says, what if you hit that guy? What if you're fleeing the scene of an accident? Chris, that could mean the loss of everything. What if somebody notices? Are you really sure? Are you positive? I know you're pretty sure, but but are you positive you didn't hit that guy? I should go back and check. So that then the compulsion comes in. Then I'm weighing the cost in my head. And it depends on how well I'm doing that day, which is a whole separate conversation. But sometimes I can say, I didn't hit that guy. There's no possible way. This is a compulsion. I need to just keep driving and say no to the compulsion. If I'm tired, if I'm super anxious, if I've already been having a rough day and have already said no to a number of compulsions, then part of me thinks, you know what? I know this is going to hammer me. This nagging thought that I might have hit that guy is going to nail me for the rest of the day, the rest of the night. I might think about it for 2 weeks after this. I'm driving back. Then I drive back. I look, obey the compulsion. So there's the obsessive compulsive. I've been obsessing about whether or not I hit the guy. I'm going to go with the compulsion because I think I'm going to feel better. And then I end up feeling like a massive loser because I went back. I knew I didn't hit the guy. And now then the thought comes in, dude, you are crazy. You are out of your mind. You thought you hit a guy? You loser. Like, you're a pastor. Like, why should anybody ever trust you? You thought you hit somebody. Like, who drives back? That is not normal. What is the matter with you? That would be one way it would play out.
Sure.
And then
Sure.
a panic attack to the best of my ability. So there was one particular counselor because I knew I was having them, but honestly, goodness gracious, and some of it I fault. I don't want to say I fault the church for, but there were
Dude, that's
certain.
what this is about. Hey, that's what this is about. I want you to say what you need to say, even if it is mildly whatever.
So
We
so
we want to get this stuff out on the table.
okay. So there were times that it was like, Chris, don't you know Philippians 4, 6, and 7? Don't
Yeah,
be anxious, pray. Don't you know 1 Peter
right,
5, 7, cast all your anxiety? Or, hey, haven't you been to cleansing stream? You just need to get that cast out of you. Like saying no to
right,
the spirit, get it cast out of you kind of thing. That's so I didn't know. I thought the panic attacks were demonic. I thought, and I didn't know what they were. I didn't know what was happening to me. I didn't even know they were somewhat common as I've now come to realize that they are with people. I just didn't know the language. And then I certainly didn't know what was specific to mine. What I started when I really broke it down with one particular counselor, what I realized for mine to the best of my ability, and again, I don't have this all figured out, but for me, when I was in a social situation where I felt trapped, where I thought that people needed a 10 from me, or an 8 to a 10, like they wanted full Chris, they wanted me to be my normal, happy, go lucky self. And I felt like I only had a 2 to give them. I was tired. I had a headache, but I felt trapped. I felt like there was no way. I couldn't just leave without it being socially awkward. So I had to perform. I just, and there's probably a lot of strings to pull at here that would send me over. If I look back at all the panic attacks I've had, they were at a restaurant, they were at someone's house, some situation where I felt like people needed me to be normal and I couldn't be normal, and I didn't feel comfortable saying, honestly, y'all, I just need to go to sleep right now. I can't stay at this social gathering. And it would send me over the edge to where physiologically, and this is at least the way it's been described to me. I know, Chip, you helped me with this language. I've already got a highly activated threat detection center, and my body would go into this state where it was like a lion is in the room, and I'd start sweating. One time I almost passed out. If I had eaten food, it would feel like it was sitting high up in my throat. There were times that I would actually make myself throw up just to make the feeling of that food being high up in my throat to just go away.
right.
And before the medication, the only thing that would really fix a panic attack, outside of occasionally I would feel out of nowhere God's supernatural presence, and it was like Jesus. For me, it was like him being on the Sea of Galilee saying, "Just stop," and he just rebuked it, and it just went away. That happens sometimes. The only physical thing I knew to do that would make it go away was sleep, and I would wake up, and it would be gone. That
Right,
was it.
right. Yeah. Just to play with the terms for anybody that is trying to figure some of this out for them or a loved one, you got obsessive compulsive disorder. So obsessive, again, lines blur a little bit, but obsessive is the thoughts. and you described it beautifully, Chris. And Joey, I'm sure you caught it, that your thoughts became extraordinarily negative and obsessive. They built on each other and they just spiraled to, just a level that just couldn't be real, just couldn't be. So that's the obsessive part of obsessive compulsive disorder. And then the behavior, turn around and go back and check, is so obsessive is the thoughts, compulsion is some behavior. Like, it's kind of a Hollywood sort of thing. You wash your hands 3 times, or you do the lock 3 times, that kind of thing. Well, that's the compulsion that follows the obsessive thought. And really, really, really important. It's all rooted in fear. And, anxiety and fear, I don't know that I'd say they're exact the same thing, but come on. They're kissing cousins for sure. And fear's at the root of it. And fear, again, you talked about the threat detection center. Fear's anchored in a certain part of the brain. And when that part of the brain revs too hot, engages too quickly, all kinds of things. And
Chris, I bet
beautiful.
you can relate to this one. I can almost bet money. So both of us, you and I, are both younger fathers. When your boys were babies, did you ever have like this thought, and you thought it was the Holy Spirit saying, go in there and check on one of your sons? And you're thinking to yourself, my son is fine. I've got to get to sleep. My little baby boy is totally fine. We just put him to bed. Yeah, but if you don't check right now, you never know, and you'll always have regrets. You've got to get up right now to make sure your child's breathing. Like, I've had those situations as a dad, and it's like, I can either lay here in bed and stay awake the whole time fighting this compulsive, or I can just get up and check and then come back. Have you had stuff like that with your kids?
So my deal still to this day, and gosh, we are getting real on this podcast. So for me, still to this day, when I go to bed, I try to hide it from the family because I don't want them to see, but I'll look too long at the front and back door locks. Even though I know they're locked, in my mind, when I go up the stairs, the thought of going up the stairs and somebody breaking in during the night because I didn't close the door, I'll look at it like I'm just too, when I say too long, just like past the point of just checking it. I'm not standing there for 20 minutes, but I'm like looking at it and just needing to settle in my mind. Sometimes I'll even say it. The front door is locked. The back door is locked. And I know that's just another way that it'll manifest. And the thought of just going upstairs without thoroughly checking, I'm like, I'm gonna think about it when I'm in bed. So which price am I? And especially at that point, I'm tired, and so it's harder for me to say no to the compulsion.
Yeah. Just to give an interesting counterbalance to this, what do you do for a living, Chris?
I am the lead pastor of Riverland Church.
So you're around people all the time.
Yes.
You get up in front of people, a group of people, like naked on stage, just you and a microphone and your Bible. Not
You're
naked.
naked?
But exposed. In other words, you do something.
It's like, what kind of
Something that
church was
most
that?
you do some you do something that most people are scared to death of, and you do it every week.
Mhm.
Every week. So we're not. You understand what I'm trying to do here? We're not talking about somebody who's paralyzed by fear. We're talking about a very specific and yet life disturbing. Definitely would fall within the category of a mental illness, meaning any illness is some part of the body not performing properly, not fulfilling its function. And there's a part of your body, and that's so important to Christians, for Christians to wrap their head around. There's a part of your body that's not functioning properly. And yet there's other times when you get up and do things that are profoundly brave. I just kind of wanted people to feel that, like, we're not talking about a guy who's huddled up in his house and can't get out. You're out there in public, man.
No, it's funny because Abby will say that I don't worry about, and she's a professional counselor, so this is more like an inside
Right.
joke between the two of us. But
Right.
she said before that I don't worry about real things. So I have no problem cliff jumping or doing something that
Wow.
I can get on crazy roller coasters. I can do a lot of times I don't worry about the finances. I'll, trust that God's going to come through in some crazy way. But it's these specific areas, these little things that honestly I get embarrassed to talk about, because in some ways I can be really brave and really courageous. I can go on adventures, taking my son to Africa, to the bush of the bush in June. Like, I can do things that I know that terrify some people, but then I
Right.
have trouble with the locks at night. I
Yeah.
don't.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's cool. It's
Chip, when
cool.
I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead. No.
Well, I was just gonna say there's territory that we can get into that we couldn't get into had like if you guys weren't as close, for instance. So I mean, this isn't a question that you would just ask someone who's opening up about mental health stuff, but as someone who knows Chris well, when would like the parallel that you made as far I thought that was so interesting. Like, Chip isn't someone, I think you said this, just paralyzed with fear. Chris is actually in a job and doing things that a lot of people would be petrified to do.
Right.
Chip, as Chris's friend, how do you balance the tension of, is there ever a time where you say, Chris, maybe you don't need to be doing some of these lines of work because of your struggles, or because we're believers, do you see clearly the calling that God has on Chris's life as a pastor and a teacher and the sorts of giftings that he's given him, to where, like, no, the calling is clear, the obstacles are clear, and so that this is your mission, is to get, all of us, is to get better with our mental health and to be used more by God. But is there ever a time where you just say, Chris, this is a tough field for you to be in?
No, I don't think so. Chris, you can tell me if it seems like there might have been a time when we talked about some of your activities needed to be managed a little better or something. I can't remember. But no, because like we were just talking about a second ago, his challenges didn't show up in the performance of his job, for lack of a better word. And he clearly has, an anointing, a calling, the touch of God in his life to do what he does. And personally, and that's why we've switched over to mental health and the mission of the church as our focus. Clearly, I think his journey is part of what gives him credibility, and part of what
Exactly.
gives him a platform to communicate grace and truth. He's a great communicator of truth, but I'm sure partly because of his own struggles, he's a better communicator of grace than he might have been. And you got to have equal amounts of those two, grace and truth. So no, it never occurred to me. Now, if he was having panic attacks in the pulpit speaking, we'd probably have had to revisit that. But never. That was just never the issue.
Yeah, I 100% like it's, and it's something to marvel at too when you think of Chris's calling, and then and I mean, I can say the same thing about myself, my calling, and then the challenges that I have. Both of them seem so clear, and it always reminds me of 2 Corinthians 12:9. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my
Yeah.
weaknesses,
Yeah.
so that Christ's power may rest on me. Like, I would venture to guess that if Chris was not open about his struggles, like, I'm kind of speaking for God here, but it would be like, whoa, that's not part of the deal. The deal is that you are aware of your weaknesses and you're aware of your callings. I want you to wear both of these things proudly, so
Absolutely.
that God can see me working through you. But I do think that if Chris wasn't open with his struggles, and I'll brag on Chris and not throw myself in this because I'm open about my struggles too. But if Chris was not
Right.
open about his struggles, I don't think God's power would rest on him as mightily in ministry. That would just be my guess when you're looking at scripture.
Yeah. 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 Let me say it here because I may forget to say it another place. Just so everybody knows, all three people you're looking at have had mental health struggles. All three of us. Now, makes an important distinction. Mine was situational, and I did it to myself. Mine was a classic adrenaline burnout, but I had panic attacks. I would probably have to say briefly obsessive thoughts. And what I mean by that is weeks, if even. But what I had done was I had abused my body, and part of my body is my brain. And I don't know, this is the exact best way to say it. So some mental health professional reach out and correct me, but I believe that my sustained chronic adrenaline engagement had depleted my serotonin levels, and my brain began to act like a person with hereditary anxiety slash OCD slash whatever. Although I don't know that I ever hit any OCD stuff. I'm not organized to remember to do the same thing, I don't think. But I'm not smart enough. But I experienced very similar. The difference, and this is important, go back to Joey's original question at the beginning of the talk. It wasn't hereditary. It wasn't a genetic thing. So when I went on medication and made some life adjustments. And for all intents and purposes, I don't know, Joey, you might remember, but it was probably a few years before I would say I was back to normal. But for all intents and purposes, it was sooner than that. But I know from inside, I wasn't back to normal for several years, because kind of what Chris was talking about, when he knows he's going into certain kind of situations, I could feel my anxiety at a level I'd never felt it before in my life. And what would happen is I'd feel that, and then the fear would come, okay, what if it overruns the banks of the river while you're in this situation? Because it's a horrible feeling. And I know there's people that are going to listen to this that deal with this stuff and over and under spiritualizing. Either one of you, Chris, I mean, that's kind of what you got trapped in. Well, you just need this verse and whatever. And I would call that over spiritualizing. And then under spiritualizing is not bringing your spirituality, your journey with God into it at all. But my deal is, let's combine the two and let's use medication. Nobody will give you a hard time if you take blood pressure medicine, and I think we're making progress, but there's still pockets of the church that fight the psychology side, the psychiatrist side, the medicine side. Joe, you ran into a bunch of that, didn't you?
Yeah, but I want to slow down and highlight just how crippling, though, what Chris actually said and what I actually experienced is it wasn't just a matter of religious circles saying pointing to this verse or that verse. Chris actually said, and I can say this alongside him, we thought it was our fault that we were struggling in our mental health because of spiritual deficiencies. Like, we thought that we were doing something shorthanded in our faith and our faith practices, and that's what was causing this. And again, for me, I'm glad that I can say that I can't really point to specific people who got that hardwired into me. It was just the culture that I was being brought up in, the things that I was reading, the people that I was being taught by who had great intentions. But man, that can be very crippling when you think, hey, the reason I'm here in these dark places are because of things I'm doing wrong spiritually. And in reality, it has nothing to do with that. But it's that cycle, because then I want to try to be better and I want to try to live better and not sin at all, because then that'll just throw the whole thing up into, disarray. And so anytime I mess up, it just fuels that narrative of, I guess I'm doing something wrong, so, and Chris, are you familiar with scrupulosity, the terminology?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So falls, and I'm hearing more and more about that. I think I sent you, Chip, there's a professional football player in the NFL who just came out about having scrupulosity in the Christian context of fear and worry and constant repenting and all that stuff.
Right. Yeah, Chris, you got anything you want to add to what Joey just said?
No, I mean, I think it's just, what you're talking about as far as blending the two. It's one of those things where a lot of times when I talk to God, I've tried, especially recently, to be very open to him, especially as to any direction he may want to lead, because I'm going to butcher the quote, but C.S. Lewis said something like, some of our questions are like asking God, is yellow a circle or a square, or how many hours are in a mile? And I always think about that, because I'm like, I may be asking right now, like, I may be looking through a lens where I'm essentially asking, is yellow a circle or a square? Like my thinking may be so jacked up in an area that I'm not even asking a question that makes sense. And I have to continually remind myself of that, because I'm like, okay, God, I don't know what to ask you. I need you to meet me where I'm at. If this is physical, if there's a way that I'm not participating with you right now, then I'm open. I need to know that you can meet me where I'm at and lead me in ways I have not known, because something's not working. Where I have to be just like that, childlike in my approach. I mean, I imagine how you would have to be if you were physically blind or something like that, where you're just like, I don't even know what the problem is. I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
And the hard part is I know there's some part of me that clings to OCD. And that's the hard part, because I know it's like, and you talked about going as early as I possibly could. When I was 9, and this is my best guess as to when this hypervigilance at least started in me. When I was 9, my mom passed away from cancer. But because everyone was being so upbeat around my brother Greg and I, nobody told us that she was dying. And they were trying to do what was right by us. But I basically came home on an average school day thinking she was just going to get through it, because she would give me a thumbs up, and everybody was saying she was going to beat it. Nobody told us what was really going on. I mean, I knew she had cancer. I knew she had lost her hair, but I mean, I thought she was going to beat it. I came home one day with wanting to show her. I was 9 years old, wanting to show her how I had done well on a paper, and she was breathing funny. So I called my dad to come home, and he walked out of her room and said, "Chris, mom's dead." And so for me, the best I can figure is that day, some things happened in my 9-year-old soul that got solidified through some rejection and stuff in high school. But that was that the world can take whatever it wants from you whenever it wants to, without any warning and at any given time. So do not be open, not to people, not to God, not to anyone. Do not be open. Do not be overly attached. Be hyper vigilant in all cases at all times, or you will be burned and shot through the chest the same way you were that day. And now, if I can change metaphors, if that was winter and I tried to put on the heaviest winter coat I could because of how cold it was, now, and obviously this is still something that I'm learning, now that I live in summer, and I've got people around me that love me, I live in a safe environment, I'm provided for, I'm well cared for, part of me still doesn't want to take the winter coat off. And that's a really hard thing. Like, if you say the words to me, Chris, just let go, man. Just relax. Like, just chill out. Like, everything's fine. It's like, you're asking me to do something that feels like, even though I know you're right, that feels like walking on a tightrope over hungry alligators, is how that is.
Yeah.
Chris, I would.
I was just going to say, Joey, that, I mean, Chris, in a beautiful way, you're highlighting exactly why we're doing this and why we chose to do this. People just don't understand how, if you can choose it, you can change it. Choice is power. If you can choose it, you can change it. If you can't choose it, you can't change it. And you can apply that to lots of issues that the churches wrestle with right now, that we think are choices, that aren't always choices. And that's that grace truth thing. Like, I mean, Chris, you'd walk barefoot across fire if you knew coming off the other side this would be over and done with. In other words, if there was something you could do that would bring an end to it, you'd have done it 3 times already. And that's part of what breaks my heart, part of why you want to see the church wrestle its way to a new place, a new resting place with these issues. Because, Joey, it's beautiful that you brought that angle out, because I probably would have forgotten it. I'm not even sure I would have thought of it. But that whole idea that that person thinks it's their fault. I mean, gosh, man, that's enough to say, God, help us do this, man. Help us do this, man, please.
And to think that, and from our vantage point, Chip, we have a deeper perspective knowing Chris, but to think that people could and they do look at mental health challenges for someone like Chris or myself who are in ministry positions and second guess those callings or second guess what God is asking us to do because of deficiencies in our mental health, connecting it to like, this is something bad that maybe we need to look at and reconsider whether or not these guys
Right.
are supposed to even be in ministry, you know?
Right, right. Well, and I do think, and I don't know, I mean, I'm not in the counseling room as much as I used to be, but I'm pretty confident saying it this way. I think it's worth the effort to work with someone to an extent or far enough to where they can determine, is it clearly genetic? Is it clearly situational and lifestyle issues like mine was? Or is it some combination of the two? Because here's why I say that. Let's say it's not genetic. Okay, it's not. And you get where I got. And you have, panic attack and stress and whatever. But it's not genetic. It's not, your brain isn't broken. It's just been abused by you and your schedule. And I'm saying that about myself. I did that to me. I really did. Now, here's the problem. Basically, that person is living their life out of sync, out of calibration with God. The worst thing you could do is just throw piss at it.
Hmm.
So we're not saying as soon as you hit blip and you're not feeling the way you think you ought to be feeling, we're not saying go get a pill. But we are saying that the church needs to realize that there are times when nothing but a pill or a miracle, I mean, you Shazam and you're healed. Just like an arm can heal, so can your brain. Until then, pill's going to be helpful. But if your issue's not that, the worst thing you can do is you can put pills on it while you're working on the issues that got you in trouble. You see what I'm saying? Because that's kind of what I did. I needed the medication so that I could function. But while I was functioning on medication, I was looking at working on the underlying issues. Like some of it for me was child stuff from my dad. I'd come to work for Seacoast. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but it's pretty honored to be hired by Seacoast. I was blown away that Greg Surratt liked me and blah, blah, blah. And I had this thought from my father. He would say, you're lazy, you'll never match anything. But what it turned into was, sooner or later, I'm going to disappoint you. I'm going to be a disappointment to you. And so that thought's back there driving me. And that's what kind of booby-trapped me. Now, the tragedy would be, what if I never got to that thought? Because I just take pills. So you got it. Am I making sense? I'm not taking off from anything you've said.
No.
But,
Yeah. Chris, at this stage in your life and your spiritual walk, and if you were to ever interact with a Christian who doubted the, I guess, legitimacy of your mental health challenges, maybe the proactivity of therapy, effectiveness of medicine, just wasn't on the scientific side of things, and maybe would poke a little bit and be like, there's some things in your life going on that maybe you're not being open about, but basically just doubting the whole mental health real thing that it is. How would you handle that at this stage in your life?
It's a great question. So yeah, I'd have a really tough time with that. I mean, that would be quite the conversation. I would point to, because there are some things that I've noticed. I've been in Christian counseling of some form or fashion for 10 years, and I've changed counselors, a few times. Yeah, 10 years, and have really have continued to work on the disciplines that I have in terms of learning to rest in God's presence. Really tried and have made adjustments and continue to make adjustments, because there are things that I know that I do that contribute to me feeling hurried, anxious, that I can continue to work on. So I think that the more somebody heard my story, I would think they would understand even if they didn't lean to the science side, I think they would understand that there are some things that happened to me earlier in life that, man, I don't know how a soul could go through without having some deep ruptures. But I would readily acknowledge that there are, maybe I would halfway agree with them. No, I don't know if I would argue with them. It depends on how open they were and what kind of questions they were asking. But I would at least point to the fact that, yeah, there are definitely some things that I at least currently know of right now that don't help my my situation that I am actively working on. And I would just show them, like, like, I've one of the things I do every day is, it's easy for me to, based on some of the rejection I experienced early on, it's easy for me to identify with success, with achievement. One thing that I've started recently is that, just Neil Anderson, from his book, I think, like, I can't remember the name of it, but I read a list of who I am in Christ every single day, that just has a list of verses. And the one that always sticks out to me the most is 2 Timothy 1:7. I've not been given a spirit of fear, but of power and love and a sound mind. Like, I read those over myself just as a way of, like, my identity is in Christ. It's not how others think of me. It's not how I perform. And I'm hoping it's sinking in more and more. I wouldn't say it's totally sunk in, but it's sinking in more and more. And it's just one thing that I do. Another thing, I use this 1 minute pause app, and they have, this morning I took about, and this isn't like, hey, pat on the back. It's just one thing that I didn't feel terribly anxious this morning, because I spent about 20 minutes listening to reflective music and people read scripture over me. That was about the first thing I did this morning. So I'm learning how to ride this wave a little better over time, and it hasn't fixed everything, but it helps.
Cool. Very
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, I still take the medication. I can see, you know, I can still see the OCD pop ups. I would like to, I hope to be at a point where I can talk about, I would say the OCD's gotten from like an 8 to a 10 in affecting me, to now where I would say it more ranges from like a 4 to a 6. I'd be lying if I said that I know that I could die with it being at a 0. I know that God could do that. But there's a part of me that would love to say at age 60 that it's a 2 to a 4. And if I knew right now that I would leave this earth with it at a 2 to a 4, I'd be pretty okay with that, based on the nature of the journey and how intense it's been. If I knew I could leave this earth at a 2 to a 4, I wouldn't consider that a loss.
Joey, about your journey that's come to mind that you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, just I want for people who may be listening who haven't had their significant share of struggles in mental health. When I hear Chris say something like that, as someone who has gone through and still goes through challenges, that just really hits so deep. I know that all suffering is suffering, but man, mental struggle is, I'll put it this way, it's a unique one. It is definitely unique. And just the thought of Chris thinking to himself, man, if by the time I was 60, if this could just be, below 4 on the reg,
Right.
it just really, that clicks. And I would say, talk about going really extreme, but I think it's a linear deal. So in the worst of my pain, that desire, like what Chris articulated was a desire. Man, I sure would like for that to happen, when I'm 60. For me, it turned into, if it doesn't happen in the next few days, I don't have the strength to outlive this. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's how bad it can get. When you multiply what Chris is saying times 100, it turns from, man, I wish this wasn't my lot when I was 60, to I can't live like this.
Right.
And it is a continuing linear deal. But I know, sorry for getting so depressing, but that's what came to mind when it comes to my struggle.
There's lots of things that we can do better And I think this conversation is intended to try to help the church kind of do better. But, one goal, I mean, if you want to set the bar, call it low, because this is not necessarily low, but we want people to not feel alone. I mean, because you kind of do, number one, you kind of want to self isolate. You don't really want to be around people when you're not feeling, like awesome. And then people kind of don't know how to handle it sometimes. And gosh, you don't want to go through this stuff alone, man.
Yeah, Chris, you and I, over the years, we have definitely had each other in the way of you and I know that we can tell one another something and the other person not bat an eye like, what? You had to turn the car back around? Like both of
Right.
us are like, nah, well, I get it, man. And to think if all these years we didn't work in a climate where these conversations were okay to have and you and I didn't have to have little secret meetings. You know what I'm saying? Like we could talk openly about this stuff. It was a big deal.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, it's
fun.
been fun. Go ahead, Chris.
No, it's funny. Just the other day, I posted something because our church right now is in a mental health series called "Fine" is a four-letter word, and I just posted something about it. And how we had a counselor speak at our church this past Sunday, and some guy, I don't even know who he was. He just posted. He said, "All it takes." What did he say? I'll butcher it a little. He said, "I hope you're being sarcastic. All a church needs is good cross, blood, the power of the death theology, and none of that psychobabble." It was the response, and I just let it sit. I was like, because I wanted to say some like really harsh things, and I just let it sit. And then this morning, I just woke up and I just felt like I could respond lovingly. And I just said, you're helping me to articulate without realizing it why this needs the attention that it does in the church. And I said a little more than that, but that's where I started.
Did it get PG-13?
No, honestly, what I
Just
said
kidding.
is he focused all on the death of Christ. I said, what did Jesus? I just kind of did like a little bit of a logical argument. I said, what did Jesus come to? Why did he die and rise from the dead? There's a lot of right answers, and I said one of them is our freedom. Are Christians perfect? Well, and this is what I said. I said yes and no. We are perfect in the sense that God sees Jesus when he sees us, but no in the sense of still having tons of brokenness to work through. And what a great psychologists, what do? And then I just quoted Romans 12:2. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And so I just tried to say open your mind a little bit. That was kind of what I was
Yeah.
shooting. I just couldn't
And
believe that.
I mean, what I think when I hear that kind of stuff is, I say, number one, I hope neither you nor anybody you love has to deal with mental health issues, true, real, physiological mental health issues, because you're either not going to know how to handle them well and not get the help you need, or it's going to devastate you that you have to reach out for that kind of help. And there's no need for that. And then the other thing I would say is, if you had, diabetes, would you take insulin? Yeah. If you had high blood pressure, would you take blah, blah, blah? Yeah. Well, you realize the brain, in case you haven't noticed, it fits inside this body, just like everything else we were just talking about. And why would you take a pill for your pancreas or a pill for your whatever and not take one for your brain? Like, the brain can break just like any other part of the body. And why do we have such a hard time with that? No, we all need to be smart enough to know that logical arguments don't dislodge some of that stuff because it's way down in there. I mean, some of it's way down at the level of their identity, like literally. Like, if you were to ask me to change this belief, I would have to change who I am. That's pretty tough stuff. But for a lot of people, sometimes they just need that kind of like, perspective. Like, that one about the body, it was one of the things that helped shift me was when I realized, okay, wait a minute. Of course the brain could break. Why not? Why couldn't it? And thank God that we live at a time when people have devoted their lives to trying to figure out how it breaks and how to fix it. Now, have they gone too far one way? I would say they have, but we've historically have been way too far the other way. And we're just trying to figure out how to balance it.
Yeah.
Well, any last thoughts? I guess we're winding up. Chris, appreciate it, man. You're awesome. Love to do lunch.
Yes. Yes. I'll text both of you.
Yeah. But I'm starting tomorrow a 4-week study called Shades of Grace, Exploring a Jesus-Shaped Culture, and pre-recorded. In fact, I'm putting the final touches to it sitting here today. Some of the written part of it, study guide and discussion questions. But bottom line is it'll hit every Tuesday on the podcast, I think, and YouTube. So check it out. And
Okay.
I'm talking to you, Chris, and anybody else out there. But love for you to check it out. Talk about grace and truth. We talk about how you become the way you are. We talk about spirit, soul, and body, how I was saved, I'm being saved, and I'm yet to be saved. Just solid stuff that you need to know if you're going to understand what we're talking about and be able to explain it to somebody else. And then the last thing we talked about last week, 4th week, is one thing I do every day, which basically anybody who knows it's a message I preach. And it's basically about what I call R&R in the Father's love, learning to receive and rest in the Father's love. And so that'll be coming out a week at a time this month. Man, awesome. Good conversation, good stuff, man.
Love you guys.
And listen, if you're out there struggling, we want you to know you're not alone. And I mean, so you're going to call me and give me a hug? Probably not. But the best we can, we're trying to create a better environment within the church for us to not feel ashamed and feel like we've got a team behind us and with us. And it's not our fault that we struggle with what we struggle.
And no big deal, but Chris and I could call Chip and get a hug. We have his number. No big deal.
That is true.
It's no big deal.
That is true.
Thanks for tuning in to Mental Health and the Mission of the Church. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss out on future conversations. And if you found value in what you heard, we'd love for you to share it with a friend or on social media. It really helps us grow and reach more people just like you. So until next time, let's continue building better partnerships between the mental health community and the mission of the church. We'll catch you in the next episode, everybody.